At the age of 18 months, my brothers and I went to live with our paternal grandparents. They had a small 3-bedroom home that was approximately 984 square feet. Since they still had 2 of their own children at home, there weren't enough beds or bedrooms for all of us. My grandparents had 1 bedroom, 2 of my aunts shared a 2nd bedroom, and my 2 brothers shared the 3rd bedroom. My bedroom was the living room, and I slept on the sofa. As far back as I can remember, the nightly routine consisted of the nightly news at 10 p.m. and the Tonight Show at 10:30 p.m., and finally, my grandmother staying up reading from 11:30 p.m. until sometime after I would fall asleep. It was during these early years that I would experience something frequently during the night. I'm sure this didn't happen nightly, but to a young person, as often as it happened, it seemed like it was nightly. I was too young to be able to tell time, and in those days, we didn't have a digital clock. But it seemed that it was 3 a.m. that I would wake up for no apparent reason. My eyes would make their way to the entrance to the bedroom my brothers occupied. This room never had a door. I think it was never intended to be a bedroom, and was a pass-through room to get to the restroom. As I would look in that direction, I would see a man sitting in a wheelchair. This was a white, ghostly figure with white hair, a dark jacket or shirt, and a blanket over his lap. The figure would sit there, never coming towards me as I expected it to do. In response, I would do what all young kids do, and I hid under the blankets until I would fall asleep. Several years later, in 1981, I was 13 years old and no longer living with my grandparents. My Aunt R., who was still living there, invited me to come and stay the night. I accepted the invitation, and because by this time the room that my brothers used to occupy was no longer a bedroom, I found my sleeping situation to be the same as it was when I was a young boy, the sofa in the living room. The memories of the ghostly figure had become a faint memory, and this night, I wasn't thinking about those fears experienced all those years before. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up for no apparent reason. I put my glasses on so I could see the time. Yes, you guessed it. It was 3 a.m. Immediately, all the memories of those nights of being alone and scared flooded my mind. As if I couldn't help myself, I looked in the direction of that bedroom entryway, and there it was. The very same figure I had seen several years before. The figure looked exactly the same as I remembered. I was unable to find the strength to seek solace beneath the blankets. I laid frozen, staring at the figure. Unlike each time I had seen the figure in the past, the man began to wheel himself towards me. There was a coffee table in front of the sofa, but the figure wheeled through it, stopping in the middle of it. As I looked closely at the face of the figure, the fear went away. To my astonishment, the figure was my grandfather. There was no way to know that some 20 years later, my grandfather would have his legs amputated and be confined to a wheelchair due to his diabetes. His hair had turned white, he had a blanket over his lap, and would often wear a dark shirt. My grandfather passed away January of 2006. In the evening after the funeral, I was sharing my story again with some of my family members. My cousin M was listening, and when I finished, he called his wife over and had me briefly share the story with her. At the end of my retelling of the story, she told her own story of when she was a little girl. She lived a couple of blocks away from my grandparents and would often wake up in the middle of the night to see a man in a wheelchair. I remember when she finished her story, the room grew silent for a couple of minutes as though everyone was trying to figure out what this could mean. Since that day in 1981, I've never seen this figure. I don't know what it means. Was it a premonition that I should have shared with my grandfather? I'll leave the rest of this story for Senpai to tell.